The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. That's what Einstein said. But what if that gift starts to devour the one who holds it? There's a type that Carl Jung spoke of: quiet, rare, not because few people are born with it, but because fewer still survive it without losing themselves. The intuitive introvert, the one who sees behind the curtain, feels what others miss, senses what's coming before it arrives. They don't live here, at the moment. They live out there, in symbols, in undercurrents, in truths no one's said aloud yet. They walk among others, but it's like they're always listening to a whisper the world can't hear. And the world, it doesn't honor whispers. It honors data, speed, and results. So these souls, they grow up misunderstood, not because they're wrong, but because they see too much, too soon. And Jung, he didn't just describe them, he left them a warning. Because if they don't find a way to ground what they carry, if they don't give language to what they see, their gift, that sacred trembling sight, can become a trap, a slow collapse from the inside. So let's walk that road together. Let's trace the shape of this inner world, and maybe, just maybe, find the thread that leads out of the dark. They don't see what's in front of them. They see what's forming behind it. The intuitive introvert doesn't perceive the world like most do. They're not anchored in what's obvious. They're attuned to what's hidden, to what's becoming. Where most people rely on facts, they listen for patterns, not the ones on paper, but the ones that rise in the silence between words, behind eyes, underneath behavior. It's not that they're psychic. It's not fortune-telling. It's something more subtle, more unnerving. It's the ability to feel what the room hasn't yet admitted. They pick up on ruptures before the earthquake. They feel betrayals in the air before a word is spoken. They meet a stranger and somehow they just know, but they don't know how they know. And so, they don't always trust it. They hesitate, caught between clarity and self-doubt, because when no one else sees it, you start to wonder if you're making it all up. That's the paradox. To carry a vision so clear, and yet be told it's invisible. Because we live in a world addicted to proof. It demands results, not resonance. It celebrates what's repeatable, not what's real. And what these souls carry can't be measured, only felt. So they are often dismissed. Too dreamy, too sensitive, too out there. And over time, that rejection sinks in, not just from others, but from within. They begin to second-guess their own truth, begin to silence the very compass that's guided them all their life. And when that happens, when they start to trade their knowing for approval, a deep fracture forms inside. Because this kind of intuition isn't casual, it's not optional. It's the way they are wired to survive. They weren't meant to live on the surface. They were born to sense what swims in the depths. But the tragedy is, the world doesn't teach them how to use this gift. It teaches them to hide it, to rationalize it away, to fit in. And so they shrink, they doubt, they disappear behind masks of logic they never truly believed in. Yet even behind the mask, the visions remain. The symbols keep rising, the truths keep knocking. It's not something they chose, it's something they are. And unless they learn to trust it, to understand its nature, to respect its rhythm, that same perception that could be their greatest strength becomes the seed of their quiet suffering. Because a gift like this doesn't just fade, it festers when ignored. It turns inward. It builds a pressure that eventually needs to be released through art, through solitude, or through collapse. And that's the danger Jung saw so clearly. Because when the intuitive introvert can no longer find a place to bring what they perceive when they can't speak it, can't shape it, can't hold it in their hands, they begin to retreat, not from the world, but from themselves. And it's there that the true unraveling begins. So they retreat, not to escape, but to breathe. Not because they're above the world, but because the world has never known how to hold what they carry. At first, the silence feels sacred, a shelter, a place where they don't have to explain themselves, where they can finally just exist without the weight of misunderstanding. But slowly, that silence turns heavy, not peaceful, but thick, like fog in the lungs, and what once felt like refuge starts to feel like exile. You see, they didn't choose to withdraw. It wasn't arrogance. It was exhaustion. The exhaustion of constantly having to decode the world, while the world refuses to even listen, of sensing everything and being told they're imagining it, of feeling deeply and being accused of being too sensitive, of seeing clearly and being met with blank stares. So they stop sharing. They pull back. They learn to smile on the outside while keeping entire storms inside. They laugh at the right moments. They nod. They play the role. But behind their eyes, there's a whole cosmos unfolding unseen, unheard. And this is where Jung's warning begins to echo. Because the intuitive introvert doesn't just see symbols, they live with them. They carry them like dreams that never quite end. And if those symbols don't find a path outward through words, through art, through ritual, they begin to build pressure. The inner world, once a source of wonder, becomes overwhelming. Like being trapped in a house where every room is filled with mirrors, each one showing a truth too big to hold. The archetypes rise, the images intensify, and the self, the grounded, observing self, starts to fade. You're no longer the one receiving the vision. You become the one haunted by it. This is the danger Jung called possession, when the unconscious no longer flows through you, but takes over. You begin to lose touch with time, with your body, with simple things, meals, faces, sleep. Everything becomes symbolic. Everything becomes loaded with meaning. And slowly, the symbolic world starts to matter more than the actual one. You stop relating to people as people and start relating to them as signs, messages, omens. And the tragedy is, no one sees it happening, because from the outside, you're just quiet, maybe a little distant, maybe just deep, but inside, it's a flood, and you're drifting, with no ground beneath your feet. Jung understood this terrain. He didn't pathologize it, but he didn't romanticize it either. He saw the gift of deep perception becomes a curse when it's trapped inside a person who has no way to translate what they feel. He knew that the unconscious isn't evil, but it is relentless. And if you don't make space for it to speak through you, it will speak over you. It will take the stage. And then, what you once carried was like a secret knowing, will carry you. Not gently, not kindly, but with the full force of everything you tried to hold alone. And that's why silence, while it may begin as protection, cannot be the final answer. Because silence, when left too long, doesn't protect. It suffocates. It blurs the edges of what's real. And soon, you no longer know whether what you're sensing is intuition or illusion, and from that edge, a fall becomes almost certain. Jung called it an irrational function, but that word irrational confuses people. It doesn't mean illogical. It doesn't mean foolish. It means it doesn't follow the usual rules of time, sequence, or cause and effect. It means it doesn't arrive by thinking, but by emerging. For the extroverted intuitive, intuition looks outward. It dances between possibilities in the external world. It sees what could be if we just tried. It chases ideas, trends, innovation, connections. But for the introverted intuitive, the movement is inward, downward. It's not a search for options. It's a descent into essence. They don't follow trails. They listen for whispers. And those whispers, they don't come in words. They come as images. A symbol, a sudden knowing, a dream that never needed to be dreamt. It's like being dropped into the depths of a dark ocean and finding you already know how to swim. Introverted intuition doesn't gather information. It receives it from somewhere ancient, from somewhere archetypal, what others call impressions or gut feelings. For the intuitive introvert, these are revelations. They're not reached through steps. They arrived as a whole, complete. They just appear. It can be an image, a flash, a pattern. And in that moment, they know even if they can't explain why. They can walk into a room and feel the entire emotional history of it. They can look into someone's eyes and see the buried story behind the smile. They can touch a symbol, a snake, a river, a spiral, and it speaks more than any paragraph ever could. But here's the problem. That knowing, it doesn't come with instructions. They can't tell you how they arrived at it. They just know. And when asked to explain, they falter, Because intuition doesn't care about linear thought. It's not interested in step-by-step logic. And this is where the misunderstanding begins. The world asks for evidence. But intuition offers essence. The world wants sequence. Intuition delivers the whole. So they grow up questioning their insight, because others don't see what they see. And more painfully, they can't explain it in a way that others will accept. It's like being fluent in a language no one else speaks, and being asked to prove that what you just heard was real. This function, introverted intuition, it's like a radar turned inward. It's scanning the depths of the psyche, not just their own, but often the collective. And when it picks something up, it comes not as words, but as images. Not as though, but as a symbol. Not as proof, but as knowing. And this is what makes it powerful and dangerous. Because when these visions rise, they're not always pleasant. They're not always welcome. And they rarely wait for the right moment. They come when they come, unfiltered, unannounced, and often unwanted. So the intuitive introvert learns to carry these visions in silence, not because they want to, but because most people won't know what to do with them. They don't realize this isn't a choice. It's not a hobby. It's how their psyche works. They are constantly decoding symbols most people don't even know are speaking. And the longer they carry these images without expression, the heavier they become. Because of this kind of perception, it's not something you can suppress. It keeps showing up in dreams, in flashes, in moments of stillness, or worse, in moments when the world demands your attention elsewhere. It does not care about your schedule. That's the burden, but also the beginning of their power. Because once they learn to trust what they see, once they stop asking the world to validate the source of their insight and instead begin to translate it, something shifts. The vision becomes useful. The symbol becomes a tool. And the one who once felt overwhelmed by inner images now becomes a quiet, steady guide for others and for themselves. But until that shift happens, until they learn to hold what rises with respect and care, that function can feel more like a haunting than a gift. And that's when the inner world starts to grow louder than the outer one. When these inner symbols aren't given voice, they don't disappear. They gather. They accumulate in the shadows, not dead, but dormant, waiting. And what begins as intuition, a clear flash, a sacred knowing, starts to lose its shape. It distorts. It shifts from message into noise. They whisper louder, not because they're angry, but because they've been ignored. And the intuitive introvert, who once walked between worlds with clarity, begins to spiral, not outwardly, not in chaos others can see, but inwardly, where the lines between truth and projection start to blur. They begin to doubt their perceptions. They second-guess every signal. What was once a symbol guiding them forward now feels like a maze with no exit. They lose the ability to tell the difference between what's arising from deep soul insight and what's echoing out from an overburdened mind. And that's the danger, because the soul, as vast as it is, has limits when it's denied expression. It's like filling a room with sacred smoke, but sealing every window, every door. Eventually, it doesn't matter how holy that incense is, you'll suffocate just the same. That's what happens when the intuitive introvert doesn't release what they receive. The visions pile up. The archetypes become invasive. And the self, once the one holding the vision, now becomes held by it. What was once a revelation, now become an obsession. The image no longer whispers. It haunts. It follows them through waking life. It paints itself into every face, every silence, every dream. And because there's no external feedback, because no one else sees what they see, the internal world becomes the only world. They stop checking in with reality, not because they've lost touch, but because reality no longer offers any resonance. And slowly, the mind loses its footing, not in madness, but in isolation. You begin to live in a realm where everything is a sign. Everything means something. Everything connects. But nothing grounds you. Nothing returns you to the body, to the day, to the simplicity of here and now. You might still go to work, still smile, still pay bills, nod in conversations, hold eye contact. But inside, you're floating. You're somewhere else entirely. That's the silent breakdown. It doesn't look like screaming. It doesn't look like a crisis. It looks like a disappearance. And that is why Jung stressed the importance of integration, because what isn't expressed becomes distorted, and what isn't grounded starts to spin. The psyche cannot hold endless symbols without structure, without ritual, without rhythm. If the visions aren't shaped through voice, movement, creation, they turn on themselves. And the visionary becomes the one being swallowed by the very thing they were born to bring forth. That's not failure. That's pressure. That's the unbearable weight of beauty with no outlet. It's what happens when something sacred is asked to remain silent for too long, and the only way out is not to shut it down, not to bury the gift, but to learn how to let it move, to let it speak before it starts screaming. And that begins with understanding that these symbols, these internal messages, they aren't meant to stay inside. They're not decorations. They're not indulgences. They're invitations. But only if we learn how to listen, and more importantly, how to respond. Then comes the turn, the most dangerous one. And it doesn't arrive with thunder or warning. It arrives quietly as belief, as certainty, as a feeling that this vision, this role, this voice inside is not just symbolic, it's you. This is what Jung called archetypal inflation. When the unconscious is not expressed, not grounded, not held with care, it doesn't just disappear, it overflows. It floods the ego. And the ego, overwhelmed by the magnitude of these inner figures, does what it always does. It identifies. You no longer see the prophet. You are the prophet. You no longer feel visited by vision. You become the vision. The line between self and symbol, vanishes, and you begin to wear the archetype like skin, not as a guide, but as an identity. And that's where it gets dangerous, because archetypes aren't personal. They are vast. They're collective. They belong to all of us, not just one. But the inflated ego can't see that. It believes it has been chosen, set apart, destined. Criticism becomes persecution. Silence becomes a sign. The loneliness you once feared now feels like proof that you are special, a misunderstood visionary, rejected by a world too blind to see. Any contradiction to your insight feels like an assault on your soul. You stop seeking feedback. You stop asking questions. You become a closed loop, repeating your own symbols back to yourself. Louder, holier, untouchable. And slowly, your intuition, once so alive, so perceptive, becomes doctrine. Your inner world, once fluid and alive, turns rigid, frozen in a self-made myth. Jung saw this again and again. Sensitive, perceptive people who, unable to express what stirred within them, began to believe they were not just sensing the divine, but were divine. Men who thought they were messiahs. Women who believed they were called to awaken humanity. Not out of arrogance, but out of an unconscious soul, left too long in the fire without a witness. Because that's the truth. Archetypal inflation is not born out of pride. It's born out of neglect, out of a psyche isolated in its own magnitude, out of a vision so overwhelming that it had no choice but to take the shape of identity. And the tragedy is, you can't talk someone out of this. You can't logic them back, because to the inflated ego, everything is a message. Every coincidence is confirmation. Every doubt is betrayal. And the person who once wanted to understand life, now I want to lead it, to preach it, to embody it. But they're not grounded. They're not rooted. They're floating high above the soil of ordinary humanness, disconnected from feedback, from limits, from the humility that keeps the soul tethered to reality. And it always begins the same way, with a deep truth that was never spoken, with a sacred image that was never given form, with a powerful insight that never found air. What we do not express possesses us. What we do not integrate inflates. And when we become the archetype, rather than holding it as a visitor, we lose touch with our ordinary self, with our relationships, with the simple, grounding realities of daily life. We become myths walking in flesh, and the world, sensing the imbalance, pulls away, not out of cruelty, but out of instinct. Because even beauty, when it becomes too much, feels like a storm, and no one wants to stand too close to lightning. So the vision, instead of opening doors, closes them. The insight, instead of healing, isolates. And the once beautiful connection to the unconscious turns into a prison made of sacred images, walls painted with meaning, but no way out. That's the high cost of a gift unheld, of a symbol mistaken for self, of a message mistaken for a mandate, and the only way back is not to kill the vision, but to step back from it, to return to the body, to the earth, to ordinary life where real transformation actually begins. There is a way out, and it's not found in logic or even in understanding. It's found in creation. The symbol must become form, not remain a whisper in the mind, not stay locked in the body as tension, anxiety, or restless sleep. It must move. Because what lives inside the intuitive introvert is not meant to stay there. It's not decoration. It's not aesthetic. It's pressure. And like any pressure, it needs release. The only way to survive the intensity of introverted intuition is to express it, to give it shape, to build a bridge between the inner world and the outer one, not for recognition, not for approval, but to stay sane. Kafka didn't write because he wanted to be understood. He wrote because he had to, because the worlds inside him were too unbearable to carry alone. Van Gogh didn't paint to please. He painted to pour his torment into something real, to turn anguish into color, to give chaos a frame. Even Jung, for all his brilliance, had to draw, had to write, had to build so the inner could become outer, so the storm could find rhythm. Because when the inner image finds its way out, it changes. The haunting becomes healing. The obsession becomes insight. The overwhelming becomes articulate. But when it stays inside, when it loops in silence, it distorts. What could have been a message becomes a weight. What could have been a gift becomes a burden. Creativity, for the intuitive introvert, is not a hobby. It's not a luxury. It's not a weekend escape. It is survival. It is breath. It is medicine for a mind that sees too much, feels too deeply, and lives too far beyond the veil. It doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't have to be art in the eyes of the world. It just has to be yours. A sketch, a journal entry, a melody hummed in private, a sculpture, a story, a movement of the hands that brings the formless into form. Because when the symbol is externalized, when it's pulled from the unconscious and brought into the light of day, something shifts inside. You're no longer possessed by it. You're in a relationship with it. And in that relationship, clarity arises. You start to see patterns not just in the world, but in your own psyche. You learn the language of your visions. You begin to understand what they're pointing to, what they're asking of you. You reclaim authorship. The symbol that once loomed over you now sits beside you. Still powerful, yes. Still vast, but no longer overwhelming, no longer consuming. And it's in this alchemy, this turning of image into gesture, intuition into creation, that the intuitive introvert begins to heal, not by escaping their inner world, but by translating it. And when they do, they not only liberate themselves, they offer others a map, a way through the dark, a language for what has no name. That's what makes these souls so rare. And when they create from that place, not for fame, not for validation, but from necessity, from devotion, from the sacred urge to make meaning visible, they become something even deeper than intuitive. They become artists of the soul, cartographers of the unseen. And their work, even if never published, never framed, never known, becomes a lifeline, not just for them, but for anyone who's ever felt the same silence and didn't know how to speak it. But even art, even expression, is not enough, because what flows out of you, if it has nowhere to land, will still leave you untethered. You can write the most powerful words, paint the most haunting images, channel visions into stories, symbols, songs, and still feel like you're floating, because expression without grounding is like lightning with no earth to strike. This is where Jung pointed us to something most intuitives ignore: the inferior function, the most forgotten voice in their psychic system sensation. It's the part of you that feels the weight of a cup in your hand, that notices the shift in air before it rains, that enjoys the heat of a bath, the sting of cold water on the face, the smell of garlic on your fingertips. And it is the exact medicine the intuitive introvert needs. Not because it's exciting, not because it gives answers, but because it brings you back to now. Touch, taste, texture, temperature, time, simple things. Ordinary things: making tea, folding laundry, sitting under the sun with nothing to figure out, breathing with your full chest, feeling your feet on the ground, not metaphorically, but literally. These things matter. They're not distractions from your depth. They're what allow that depth to stay inhabitable. Because if you live only in the sky, you forget the feel of your own hands. And what use is a vision if the one carrying it can't walk? The body is not the enemy of the intuitive. It is the anchor, the bridge, the ground that keeps the soul from drifting too far out. And when you learn to return to it, not as a duty, but as a ritual, your intuition sharpens, your insight deepens, not because you're escaping the inner world, but because you've rooted it into something real. You stop being consumed by symbols and start living with them, walking with them, working with them. You realize the prophet also needs to eat, also need to sleep, also needs to hold someone's hand and feel the warmth of being held back. Grounding doesn't diminish the sacred, it signifies it. Because without grounding, your visions become performance, a constant spinning wheel of insight with no rest. But with grounding, they become a compass, a guide, something you can live, not just think about. And this is the paradox: most intuitives never expect the deeper your insight, the more essential your routines. You need the walk, you need the cook, you need the garden, You need the rhythm of dishes in the sink and the quiet joy of folding a shirt just right. It's not about perfection. It's about presence. It's about finding the sacred not only in symbols, but in touch, in repetition, in breath. You don't lose your mystery in this. You embody it. You let the inner world root itself in action, and in doing so, you make it strong enough to serve not just your own psyche, but the lives around you too. Because when you're grounded, your vision stops being a burden and starts becoming a blessing. To be an intuitive introvert is to carry unseen truths in a world that only trusts what it can touch. It's a quiet burden, but also a sacred one. You're not here to escape into the inner world, nor to betray it just to belong. You're here to bridge them, to give voice to what has no name, and root what others can't even see. So don't vanish. Create. Ground. Speak, even if it's only a whisper at first. And if this echoed something inside you, share it with the ones who live quietly between worlds, too. And tell me in the comments how you keep your vision alive without losing yourself. Subscribe if you're ready to remember what the world taught you to forget. The journey's just beginning. Share your reflections in the comments. Subscribe for more deep dives into the soul's quiet truths.